Vivid verses.
I noticed the first crack in October. Not a fight, not a betrayal, just a small thing, the kind you file away without meaning to. Cassandra had been on the phone with her friend Bria when I came home, and she'd moved to the bedroom before I'd even set my keys down. I hadn't thought much of it then. People have private conversations. I was not a suspicious man by nature, but I was an observant one. By November, I had a small mental folder. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could lay on the table and say here, look at this. Just a collection of small inconsistencies. The way she'd redirect certain conversations before they fully formed. The way she'd describe arguments we'd had to her sister on the phone, and I'd stand in the kitchen listening, recognizing the shapes of the events, but not quite the colors she painted them in. Like a photograph of a place you'd visited, taken from an angle that made it look like somewhere else entirely. I love Cassandra. I want to be clear about that. I'm not telling this story as a man who was looking for a reason to leave. I was looking for a reason to stay, which is maybe why I saw the thing clearly when it finally showed its full face. We'd been together long enough that our rhythm was established, our habits grooved into the floors of the apartment like furniture tracks. She was sharp, funny, socially gifted in a way I admired. She could read a room the way a musician reads a crowd, adjusting herself in real time, knowing exactly what register to play in. I'd always found that quality impressive. I just hadn't fully understood, yet, that I was sometimes the room. The argument that finally broke the surface happened on a Tuesday in late November. Nothing catastrophic, a disagreement about a weekend plan that had been changed without discussion, my pointing out that it had been changed, her insisting I'd agreed to the change in a conversation I had no memory of. And when I held my ground calmly, said I don't think that conversation happened, the response was not clarification. The response was escalation. You always do this, she said. You always make me feel like I'm making things up. I stood in the kitchen and looked at her, and I thought, that is a very specific thing to say about a very specific argument about weekend plans. The leap from I don't think that conversation happened to you always make me feel like I'm making things up was not a stumble. It was a stride, a long practice stride. I filed that away too. I brought up therapy the following week. I want to be precise about my reasoning because it mattered. I wasn't suggesting therapy from a place of defeat or desperation. I was suggesting it because I am a man who believes in structured problem solving, and what we had was a problem with structure. We were having the same disagreements in different costumes. Same argument, new props, new scene. A neutral third party with professional tools seemed like the intelligent option. I think we should try couples therapy, I said. We were on the back patio a Sunday afternoon, coffee cooling in our mugs. Not because I think we're broken, because I think we have a communication pattern that keeps producing the same result, and I'd like to interrupt it. Cassandra looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Something moved behind her eyes. Calculation, maybe, or surprise at the suggestion coming from me first. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. Yeah, I think that could be good. The agreement came too easily. That was the thing I noticed and didn't let myself name yet. Not relief, not vulnerability, just okay. Yeah, like a chess player who's been waiting for you to make a specific move. I noticed it. I stored it. I said nothing. We found a therapist named Dr. Holt through a referral from a colleague of Cassandra's, and I registered quietly that she was the one who found the person, but I didn't object. She had more bandwidth for that kind of search that week, and I had no specific reason to distrust the selection. Dr. Holt came with solid credentials, a calm professional presence, and an office that smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Her assistant, a woman named Trish, handled scheduling and intake from a small desk just outside the main office door. The first session was orientation. Dr. Holt was measured, professional, appropriately neutral. She outlined her approach, asked us each to describe what had brought us in, listened without leaning toward either of us. I appreciated the formality of it. I described the communication loop we'd fallen into, the same arguments, the feeling of speaking past each other, the occasional sense that my memory of events was being contested in ways that left me uncertain whether I was missing something or being managed. Cassandra described a man who was emotionally withholding, who intellectualized rather than felt, who made her feel unheard. I sat with that and turned it over carefully. Was that fair? I asked myself honestly. I was not a man who emoted dramatically. I was quiet, analytical, precise. But unheard? I listened carefully to everything. I thought about it. I tested it against my own behavior as neutrally as I could. It didn't match. But I held it open as a possibility because that's what honest self-examination requires. Second session. Third session. The pattern that was emerging had a texture to it that I couldn't quite name. Dr. Holt would introduce a framework, a communication model, a concept about emotional availability, and I would engage with it directly, examine it, accept what fit, and push back thoughtfully on what didn't. And Cassandra would respond to that pushback not by engaging with my reasoning, but by performing injury. A slight withdrawal, a carefully placed C, this is what I mean, delivered to the room rather than to me. And Dr. Holt would gently pivot, and the session would move on, and I would be left with the distinct sensation of having been heard but not understood. Third session, I drove home in silence. Cassandra filled the silence with observations about what Dr. Holt had said, and I listened and gave minimal responses, and I thought, something is structured here. Something about the way these sessions move feels less like discovery and more like choreography. I couldn't prove it. I just felt the geometry of it. The way certain lines landed with a little too much precision, the way Dr. Holt's neutral observations seemed to have been marinated in a specific framing before they reached me. I filed it. I said nothing. The fourth session was a Tuesday evening, and it went much as the others had. The same arcs, the same gentle tilting of the room's gravity. I said what I felt honestly. I engaged with the frameworks offered. I watched Cassandra perform distress at moments that seemed engineered for effect rather than born from genuine pain. Afterwards, we walked to the car separately. Not dramatically, just because she'd stopped to check her phone and I kept walking. On the way home, she was warm, almost buoyant, in the way she sometimes was after sessions. Like something had been accomplished. I'd never been able to name why that specific warmth bothered me until that drive home, when it finally clarified. She was warm in the way someone is warm after a meeting has gone well. Not after an honest and difficult conversation, after a meeting. I drove. I kept my face neutral. I thought about it all the way home. The call came the following Thursday. I was at my desk mid-afternoon, and I saw the office number for Dr. Holt's practice on my phone. I answer on the second ring. Is this a good time? It was Trish, the assistant. Her voice was careful, carrying the specific weight of someone who had rehearsed an opening sentence several times. It is, I said. I was wondering if you might have time to come in, she said. Just you. I know that's an unusual request, and I want to be upfront. This isn't a session, and Dr. Holt won't be in the building. I'd like to speak with you about something I feel you have a right to know. I let a moment pass. I was already very still. When would work? I said, tomorrow afternoon, if possible. After 4. I'll be there 4:30, I said. We hung up. I set the phone down on the desk and looked at it for a moment. The call had lasted less than 90 seconds. In that 90 seconds, several things had shifted in my internal landscape, and I took time, deliberate, unhurried time, to map them. Trish called me, not Cassandra. She specified Dr. Holt would not be present. She said, something you have a right to know. She called it a disclosure about a conflict. I didn't let myself sprint to conclusions. I'd learned a long time ago that the mind, when it senses it's been wronged, will race ahead of the evidence and start building a narrative. I was not going to do that. I was going to walk into that office tomorrow and listen with an open mind, and then I was going to decide what to do with whatever I heard. I made dinner that evening. Cassandra came home, and we ate together, and I was present and genuine and gave nothing away, not because I was performing anything, but because there was nothing to perform. I did not know yet. I was simply a man who had received an unusual phone call and had chosen to gather information before forming a conclusion. That night, lying in the dark, I ran scenarios. Not obsessively, methodically. If Trish told me something minor, an administrative concern or a scheduling conflict, I would thank her for her time and move on. If she told me something that confirmed the geometry I'd been sensing since session 2, I would take that information, sit with it, and decide how to use it, because that was the only question that mattered. Not how to react, how to use it. I slept reasonably well. Trish was already in the small waiting area when I arrived, sitting not behind her desk, but in one of the 2 chairs normally reserved for clients. The office was quiet, that particular quality of quiet that belongs to professional spaces after hours, when all the careful neutral furnishings have nothing to do. She looked like she hadn't slept well. She was a woman probably in her early 40s, practical haircut, reading glasses on a chain, and the specific expression of someone who has made a difficult decision and is committed to it despite residual uncertainty. I sat across from her and waited. "I want to say first," she began, "that I've thought about this a great deal, and I believe I'm doing the right thing. But I also want to be honest that this puts me in a difficult position professionally, and I'm asking you to respect the limits of what I can share." "Understand," I said. "Go ahead." She folded her hands in her lap and looked at me directly. "Your girlfriend, Cassandra, has been coming in for individual sessions with Dr. Holt, separate from your joint sessions. She began them before your couple's work started. I kept my face neutral. I kept my breathing regular. I let her continue. In those individual sessions, she has been, I'm trying to choose the right word, preparing Dr. Holt with a framework for understanding your relationship, your character, your behavioral patterns. She's been building a picture of you as the source of the dysfunction between you." Trish paused, and she's been coaching herself on language to use in the joint sessions. Language that would land with clinical weight. Phrases that Dr. Holt would recognize from diagnostic frameworks. The silence in the room was total. "Dr. Holt has become aware," Trish continued carefully, "that her objectivity may have been compromised from the start. That the neutral space she believed she was holding has not been neutral in the way it should be. She is ethically bound to disclose this conflict, and a proper disclosure will happen. But I wanted to speak to you first because," she stopped, smoothed her trousers once, resumed, "because I've watched you in 4 sessions try to engage honestly with a process that was designed to work against you. And I thought you deserved to know before that disclosure came through official channels." I sat with it for 3 full seconds, counted them internally, let the information fully arrive. "Thank you," I said. Trish looked at me with an expression that contained, among other things, some surprise. That's all I need," I said. Not coldly, evenly. "You've taken a genuine risk to tell me something I had a right to know. I'm grateful for that, and I'll honor the limits you asked me to respect. You have my word." She exhaled. "What are you going to do?" I looked at her, and I almost smiled. Not from pleasure, but from the particular quality of a thing finally becoming clear. "I'm going to finish the process," I said. I drove home in the kind of quiet that isn't empty. It was full of the sound of 4 sessions replaying, full of the small, accumulated evidence I'd been storing without knowing what it was evidence of. The carefully placed phrases, the performed distress, the warmth she carried out of sessions like a briefcase full of accomplished objectives. I had been in a stage production. I had been the only one in it who didn't know the script. I want to describe what I felt accurately because it mattered both to me and to how I decided to proceed. I felt something cold and clean, like a window being opened in a room that had been closed for a long time. I did not feel betrayed in the hot, frantic way of someone who's been ambushed by something they never could have seen. I felt betrayed in the quiet way of someone who had been seeing the outline of a thing for months and had now been handed the full photograph. I felt clear. The anger was present. I want to be honest about that. It was there, somewhere below the surface, a slow, deep current. But I have never been a man who functions from anger. I function from clarity. And right now, I had more of that than I'd had in months. I did not go home and confront Cassandra. This was not weakness. This was the opposite of weakness. I went home and made a cup of tea and sat in the kitchen and thought carefully about what I wanted the end of this story to look like. Not what I felt like doing, which would have been to lay the whole thing out on the kitchen table that very night and watch her attempt to navigate it. That would have been satisfying for approximately 15 minutes. Then it would have been a long, messy argument full of denial and counteraccusation and tears and misdirection, and it would have ended with nothing resolved and everything scattered. No, we had one more joint session scheduled. On Thursday, use the session. The thought arrived fully formed, with the quiet certainty of something correct. Use the room she had set up. Use the structure she had manipulated. Use the presence of Dr. Holt, who now knew she had been a tool in someone else's hands. Walk into that room and say everything clearly in the exact environment that had been designed to neutralize me. Turn the architecture around. I drank my tea. I thought through it methodically. I was not planning a performance. I was not planning a scene. I was planning to say true things in order, with complete composure, in a setting that would give those true things their fullest weight. Cassandra came home around 8. She was in good spirits. She usually was on evenings when we didn't have sessions, the absence of the structured environment seeming to relax her in a way I now understood differently than I had before. We watched something on television, and she fell asleep on the couch, and I sat in the chair across from her and looked at her face, slack and unguarded in sleep, and I felt something complicated move through me. I had loved this woman. I still felt the shape of that love, even now. That's the thing no one tells you about the end of something, that the end and the love can exist in the same room, at the same time, without canceling each other out. You can grieve something and be done with it simultaneously. You can see clearly and still feel the weight of what the clarity costs you. I turned off the television and went to bed. Thursday arrived without ceremony. I was calm all day in the particular way of someone who has already made their decisions and is simply waiting for the moment to arrive. I ate well, slept adequately, moved through the hours without drama. I thought through what I was going to say several times, not rehearsing it as a performance, but clarifying it, making sure every word I intended to use was precise, was honest, and was said for the right reason. Cassandra was quiet in the car. She often was on the way to sessions. I'd attributed it before to thoughtfulness or preparation. Now I attributed it to something else, and the relabeling was quiet and final. The office had its usual smell, cedar and old paper. Trish was at her desk, and she glanced up when we came in, and her eyes met mine for a moment. Not dramatically, just acknowledgement. I gave her a slight nod. We were shown in. Dr. Holt was already seated, and she looked different. Not visibly distressed, but changed in the way that someone looks when they're carrying the specific weight of professional shame. She was still composed, still professional, but something in her posture had a quality of bracing, and I understood that Trish had told her I'd been in, or that she had come to her own full reckoning with what she'd allowed to happen? Probably both. We sat down. The usual opening. How has the week been? What are you each bringing in today? Cassandra began. She was fluid, articulate, working through a familiar variation on the narrative she'd been building. The emotional unavailability, the intellectualizing, the way disagreements always seemed to resolve in his favor because he was simply better at argument. She was good. I'd always known she was good at this. I listened to all of it. Let complete. Dr. Holt turned to me. What are you bringing in today? I looked at her for a moment before I spoke. Honesty, I said. I'm bringing in honesty. Something shifted in the room. A slight change in atmosphere pressure, the way a conversation does when it turns a corner it hasn't turned before. I want to say some things clearly, I said, and I'd like to not be interrupted while I say them. After I'm done, there'll be room for responses. I looked at both of them briefly, then found a neutral focal point between them. I know about the individual sessions. The silence was immediate and total. I looked at Cassandra. Her face had done something, a quick, involuntary rearrangement that she recovered from in less than 2 seconds. She was good, but not quite fast enough for someone who had been watching her as carefully as I had. I know that you started seeing Dr. Holt individually before our couple's work began, I said. I know that you used those sessions to build a framework, a clinical, language-specific framework for how Dr. Holt would perceive me. I know that you prepared specific phrases drawn from diagnostic vocabulary to deploy in joint sessions in ways that would carry professional weight they wouldn't have had if you just said them plainly. I paused. I know that you designed this process to have an outcome before it started. I turned to Dr. Holt. I don't believe you are a dishonest person, I said. I think you were used. I think you were approached by a skilled and strategic person who began working on your perception of me months before I sat in that chair. And by the time I did sit in that chair, you already had a framework for who I was and what I was doing. I think you've probably known for some time that something was wrong with how these sessions have been proceeding. I held her gaze. I hope that the disclosure that needs to happen from your end will happen cleanly and fully. Dr. Holt did not deny any of it. That was its own answer. I turned back to Cassandra. She had arranged herself. She was in a posture I recognized, the one that preceded a composed, methodical dismantling of whatever I just said. She would address the how do you know, she would address the framing, she would probably find a way to make the fact that I'd sought information about this into evidence of my untrustworthiness. I spoke before she could. I want to be clear about something, I said. I'm not asking for an explanation. I'm not looking for a conversation about whether what I'm describing is accurate. It is accurate, and I know it is, and we both know it is. What I want to do is say it plainly in this room because this room was the one used, and that matters to me. You don't know what you... she started. I'm not finished, I said. Not loudly, not with heat, but with a quality of finality that stopped her mid-sentence. What you did took real effort, I said. It took planning and patience and a fairly sophisticated understanding of therapeutic frameworks. I want to acknowledge that because I think part of what made it possible for this to go on as long as it did is that I kept giving you the benefit of intelligent doubt. I kept thinking, the geometry of this feels wrong, but I might be missing something. I held it open. I paused. I'm not holding it open anymore. Cassandra's composure was intact, but behind it, something had changed. The particular aliveness that she carried in sessions, that ready, primed quality, had gone slightly flat, the way a prepared speech deflates when the audience turns out to know the material. I want to ask you directly, I said. Not because the answer will change anything. It won't. But because I want to give you the choice to be honest right now, at the end, in a way that you haven't been. I looked at her steadily. Was any of what you brought into this room true? Any of it? Was it genuinely felt, or was it all constructed? The question sat in the room. She said nothing, and in her silence, which was not the silence of someone searching for words, but the silence of someone calculating. I had my answer. "Okay," I said quietly. I turned back to Dr. Holt, who was very still in her chair, and I saw in her expression the particular quality of a professional confronting the full shape of their own failure. I had no interest in compound cruelty. The point had been made. "I want to speak to you for a moment," I said to her, "not as someone who is angry with you, but as someone who expects accountability from professionals." I kept my voice level. What happened in this room? The use of a therapeutic relationship to build a directed case against a client who had no knowledge they were being framed has consequences, not informal ones. I want you to understand that I intend to pursue those consequences through the appropriate channels. The ethics board, whatever formal disclosure process your licensure requires. I'll let that sit. I'm not saying this to frighten you. I'm saying it so there's no ambiguity about what comes next. Dr. Holt gave a single, small nod. The nod of someone who had known this was coming and had decided to meet it without resistance. I looked back at Cassandra one last time. She was watching me with an expression I found, in that moment, almost unbearably clarifying. It was not guilt. It was not remorse. It was the expression of a person recalibrating, try to find the new angle, the new approach, the next move on a board that had just been swept clean. "I'm ending this," I said. "Not here and not like this, because I'm upset. I want to be precise about that. I'm ending it here, in this room, because this room was the instrument. It's right that it ends here." I held her gaze. What we had before, I won't pretend it was all fabricated. Some of it was real. But what you chose to do with it told me everything I need to know about how you see me. Not as a partner, as a problem to be managed. I paused. I'm not a problem that needs managing. I stood. I was absolutely composed. I felt the deep current of grief under the clarity, and I let it be there, and I did not let it reach my face because grief was mine and this moment belonged to truth. "I'll arrange to have my things out of the apartment this weekend," I said. "I'd like you to be elsewhere during that time." I looked at Dr. Holt. "Good evening." I picked up my jacket from the chair back, turned, and walked to the door. My hand was steady on the handle. The cedar and old paper smell was strong as I opened it. And then I was in the outer office, and Trish looked up from her desk, and I looked at her, and I said simply, "Thank you." She held my gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod. I walked out into the evening. The air was cold and clear. I stood on the pavement outside the building for a moment, and I let the cold reach me. All of it, the loss and the clarity and the particular expensive weight of seeing something completely. Then I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The street around me was quiet, just the ordinary quiet of a Thursday evening, people going about the architecture of their ordinary lives. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel, and I breathed once, deeply, and I stayed very still. This is the thing about clarity. It doesn't protect you from the hurt. It just means you don't misplace the hurt. You know exactly what it belongs to, and you can hold it honestly, and you don't have to do anything dramatic with it. You don't have to turn it into rage or denial or a rewritten story where you were always the one who saw it coming. I had loved her. That had been real. And she had taken that real thing and used it as scaffolding for something carefully engineered. And now the scaffolding was down. I was sitting in a car on a cold Thursday evening, and what was true was simply what was true. I had said what needed saying, in the room that had been used, to the people who had used it. That mattered to me. Not performance, not audience, not the satisfaction of a final word for its own sake. It mattered because honesty has a proper address, and I had delivered it to the right one. I started the engine. I pulled out into the quiet street, and I drove. Not toward anything yet, just forward, which was the only direction that remained. The weekend arrived without drama. I texted her the window, Saturday, midday to 4, and received a single acknowledgement in return. When I arrived at the apartment with a friend named Garrett, she was gone, as requested. The apartment felt altered already, the way spaces do when a decision has been made about them. Garrett helped me box up what was mine without asking questions. He'd known me long enough to know that I would talk when I was ready, and that unnecessary questions were not his job right now. That was the kind of friend he was, and I was grateful for it in the quiet, uncomplicated way you're grateful for things that simply work. We carried boxes to the car in the cold afternoon light. 3 trips. 4. The aggregate of a life shared, reduced to what was mine, which turned out to be less than I might have expected and more than enough. On the final trip, I stood in the empty spare room and looked at the marks on the floor where the shelves I'd built had stood. Small indentations in the carpet. Evidence of presence, the kind that doesn't come out. I thought, there will be an explanation, she tells people. There will be a version of this story in which I am the villain, or the problem, or the cold and unavailable man who couldn't open up, and it will be told with the same precision and clinical vocabulary she brought to the sessions. It will be compelling. Some people will believe it. And then I thought, that's not my problem. This was the thing I'd had to arrive at, genuinely arrive at, not just intellectually accept. What she did with the story after this was no longer my territory. My territory was my own truth, my own conduct, my own knowledge of what had actually happened in that room and all the rooms before it. I walked out of the spare room. I nodded to Garrett, who was waiting by the door. We left. The drive was quiet, but not heavy. Garrett turned the radio on after a few minutes, a low murmur of something easy, and I drove and let the city move past me in its unremarkable Thursday afternoon way, and I thought about nothing in particular, which was, I realized, the first time in several months that I had been able to do that. In the days that followed, I did what I'd said I would. I filed a formal complaint with the relevant ethics board, documenting what I knew, what Trish had told me, what the sessions had felt like in retrospect, the specific pattern of influence I'd experienced. I was precise and factual. I made no claims I couldn't support. I did not dramatize. I stated the conduct and the impact and submitted the documentation and let the process run. I don't know how it resolved. That's true. I removed myself from proximity to the fallout once the formal steps were taken. It was enough to have set it in motion. The appropriate channels had the information. What they did with it was their jurisdiction, not mine. What I knew and kept and didn't compromise with the passage of time was this. I had gone into that process honestly. I had tried to fix something real. When the process turned out to be something other than what it was presented as, I hadn't collapsed into confusion or denied what I was seeing. I had gathered information, held my reaction until the right moment, and then said true things in a true voice with no audience, but the people who needed to hear them. That was enough. That was the whole of what I owed myself and the situation. The grief existed, and I let it. Some mornings it arrived before I was fully awake, the particular weight of loss that doesn't sort itself into clean categories. Not just her. The future I'd imagined, the ordinary architecture of shared life, the version of this story that might have been. I let it come in the mornings. Then I made coffee, and I moved forward, and by the time I was dressed and in the world, I was simply a man who had learned something expensive and true about another person and about himself, about his own capacity to see clearly even when seeing clearly costs something. That was what I held on to. Not bitterness, not the warm satisfaction of having been vindicated, though I had been. Just the knowledge that I had not looked away from the thing when it showed itself to me. I had seen it. I had named it. I had stood in the room and said so. That in the end was everything.
Thanks for listening.